story tonight on the show are the new labor laws which have come into place. 3 codes were passed by the Rajya Sabha a day after they went through in the Lok Sabha. These were discussed for about 2 hours in the absence of opposition members, and the government claims that this will overhaul the rigid labor code in the country, will maintain and strike a balance between what employers want and what employees want. It will give an opportunity for industry to be more flexible with the way they hire and fire. It cuts down the ability of workers to go on strike, but it also expands the ambit of social security by bringing into it gig workers, aggregators, etc. The essential parts of the law include increasing the threshold of companies that require to adhere to standing codes to 300 workers instead of just 100. In fact, let me go across to my colleague Vikram Oza, who is explaining how these laws will make a difference.
Contentious farm bills. It seems the government has been in a rush to clear the labor reforms and 3 codes. Let's take this one code after another. The first one on industrial relations, which gives firms that have 300 or fewer than 300 employees the right not to have to get the approval from the center to shut down a unit and to retrench staff. Earlier, that used to be for firms that had 100 or fewer than 100 employees. So it's a big development, considering that we are in a stage in India where unemployment is at historic highs. This code legalizes the hiring of employees for a fixed term as well, and it deems such fixed term employees at par with your other employees. So that brings us to the occupational code as well, because that tends to deal a lot with contractual workers. Under this code, there will be a single license that firms need to get contract workers on board, and it's mandated under it that each worker gets an appointment letter. Now, that has become a must when they are hired. The code also ensures the portability of the public distribution system and other benefits, which is going to help migrant workers who travel between states looking for work on a contractual basis. And it will also obviously help the center and the state to create that database of migrant workers, which they haven't had. Besides that, of course, the code maintains that there cannot be any gender discrimination for any kind of work. And coming to the Social Security Code, it provides for universal social security for almost 90% of India's workforce. That roughly calculates to 50 crore workers who work in the unorganized sector. They work in the gig economy, the platforms, all of them included. Under it, the specific criteria that you need to be in a firm for 5 years to earn gratuity, for example, that has been done away with. So that in a nutshell are the 3 codes that have been cleared by Parliament, and really what they bring to the table both for employers and employees.
All right, now the question is, are these really pro-worker as is claimed? Do they tilt in the favor of industry at the cost of workers and the security for workers? Do they actually give the industry everything that they wanted? To speak on this, I am joined today by Pradeep Bhargava and Rituparna Chakraborty, both, I would say, experts on this subject. Welcome to the show. Mr. Bhargava, let me begin with your take. Reform in labor, I would think, would be a cornerstone of industry demand for decades. Has that demand honestly and truly been met today?
I think so. And I would also say, Vikram used the word government rush through. I think this is one of the most deliberated piece of legislation spread over 5 years, different parliamentary committees. I'm saying this because I think it went through different interactive pattern. It went through the stakeholders' views, and I think it's a distilled version has come out well. To your question, Tamanna, it's just not a labor reform. In fact, to me, it appears is the way we are reforming how we're going to treat the entire workforce. Typically, labor reform used to be organized workforce, organized labor. There's terms of agreement, wage settlement, strike, etc. This is really going into universal, both as social security as well as in terms of this. So, answer to your question is yes, it's landmark. It's going to make a difference for decades together, and I'm glad we have something like this, because all along the number used, 10% of workforce was attracting the attention of the society, of the government, of the legislation, of the parliament. What were we doing? We're dealing with a very small subsegment and ignoring the large masses which are coming, gig workers, platform workers, migrant workers. So I think it's a landmark decision, and we can get into the debate, but I'm glad it has come, even though it took 5 years.
Sure. I think the reference to rush through, Mr. Bhargav, was to how the bills were passed in the upper house today in just 2 hours to discuss 3 whole codes. But let's come to the details of it, and I think we need to go into it minutely. Rituparna, I want to first understand how this will actually change things, because we know that labor is on a concurrent list. States can do their own thing, and these codes will act as guidelines. We've already seen states bringing out their own sort of reforms or changes that they need to attract industry in the wake of COVID, dealing with the aftermath of that, depending on what state and what the changes were. So to what extent do you think this will actually translate?
Very, very important piece that you've introduced in the conversation. Just to give you, because we want to talk about details of it, I think India has been a hostile habitat for entrepreneurs in any case, and that gets showcased by few facts. I mean, India right now, any country, any organization in India today is looking at a compliance universe which consists of almost 70,000 compliances, 6,618 filings, 1,536 acts, out of which labor across state and central till yesterday consisted of 463 acts, 32,542 compliances, and about 3,048 filings. So essentially, the passing of the 3 codes yesterday and the one that happened earlier has reduced the number of acts technically to about, at this point of time, let's say, what's the number? It's about 434, because 29 acts have been subsumed across these codes, which essentially means that we still have across the state government and the balance about another 419 acts which still remain, their filings, their compliances. So yes, we have made a huge progress, and it's historical, and I do not want to shy away from acknowledging that, but I think it's a nice beginning is how I'd like to put it, because I think first we need to watch out for the rules, because the rules will determine the number of compliances and filings that organization still needs to do under these 4 codes. And we'll also have to now delve deeper and spend time how state governments now can utilize this as a guiding stone in terms of how they can go about simplifying the compliance universe at their end.
Ritu, let me look at this a little more holistically. You have approached it, and correctly so from your point of view, from the issue of compliances for companies. But when we're looking at a policy decision of this magnitude, we also have to look at how it's impacting the entire workforce at a time that the workforce itself is shaken up. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We saw what happened with migrant workers in the first couple of weeks of the lockdown, and it displayed the lacuna in our entire system to even recognize their existence. Do you think that these laws have addressed the need of the hour holistically, not just, for reduced paperwork for companies, but even in terms of worker welfare, employer welfare?
Right. So I think what essentially the pandemic has clearly exposed in front of us are our underlying conditions. And one big one is the lack of formalization, whether it's enterprises as well as the workforce. And essentially, my way of looking at it is that if you look at out of the 1.3 crore GST registrations, there are 70,000 formal enterprises who stood resilient during the pandemic and have been able to protect the interest of the workers. The message is very clear that if India has to make itself resilient, if India needs to be prepared for any such uncertainties in future, we need to bring about rampant formalization. And when there are formalization, you will see our ability as a country to protect the interest of the workforce go up. At this point of time, pandemic, that's why has exposed the vagaries of those who were employed in the informal sector, who did not have any proper contract of employment, who were casually employed, who actually were never in the ambit of any of these labor laws, the same labor laws that we are trying to reform right now. And hence, the very laws which were meant to protect the greater interest of our workforce, if it doesn't touch them, we need to question why. Essentially, what these laws have actually are paving the path. The laws are paving the path towards ensuring that there is greater formalization of enterprises and the workforce. And if that happens, it automatically brings more and more people under the ambit and protection of what our labor laws possibly can provide. And I think that message and that underlying
let me get on to let me get Pradeep Bhargava on that point, because I think it's an important one. Right now, all the focus is on things like there are a lot of conditions for workers to go on strike. Unions have been diluted. What does that mean, etc., etc. But I think we should talk about the formalization, because so far the labor laws have not really been a protecting force for a majority of Indian workers, simply because they didn't exist under the ambit of these labor laws. What is the specific incentive here, Mr. Bhargav, for companies to get more workers on board formally? So to ensure that they have social security benefits, to ensure that they have responsibilities towards them.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm glad you made a distinction between ease of doing business and really labor law. Half the thing that we deal with when we talk about labor reforms, we deal with how we're dealing with the government. Let's keep that aside. The basic issue is, have the vast 90% of the people, or a large number of percentage of people, have they been affected? Yes, for the first time, unorganized workforce, gig worker, platform worker, migrant worker has been acknowledged in the vocabulary for the first time. The primary responsibility has been given to the principal employer. There have been various funds being created, social security fund for organized workforce. Now I'm talking about the law. How we implement is a separate discussion. Yes, I think the government from its side is coming with a universal social security system, making steps. It's just not a lifetime payment. It's certainly taking care of their medical accident, taking care of their unemployment, taking care of their old age, maternity. So answer to your question is yes, there is a very, very serious attempt on part of the government. Now the question that comes, how far will the companies start absorbing these informal workers on their payroll? Now, one of the challenges, and this is something we discussed a lot, some of this whole concept of in the vocabulary of permanence is irrelevant. The companies don't know whether they are permanent, so the entire gamut of thinking that if I join a company, I become permanent has been keeping the employers from taking this. Fixed term employment is a concept which has been introduced for the first time in the national legislation, will give the employer an opportunity of taking these very people on their payrolls, making them formal, giving them social security, and still be certain that they were not a lifetime liability. And really speaking, come to think of it, this whole thing about security of the labor, people getting fired. I mean, organizations don't hire people to fire them. Organizations hire people to develop. You don't fire. Firing has been a big name used. If I don't need, so there is a flexibility required, which fixed term employment gives. There is a personal employer accountability, which this law provides. And I personally believe that if the organizations don't have this pressure, that moment I hire somebody on my payroll, give an appointment, he or she becomes my lifetime liability, organization will start responding. They'd rather have somebody on their payrolls rather than a contractor giving on the thing. So answer to your point, this is moving in that direction. Government should certainly continue to encourage this. And I'm sure more and more people will come. But let's also understand, the whole economy is moving towards a whole lot of informal sector.
I just want a quick...
Yeah.
Yes. Ritu, I just want to get a quick word from you, and I request you to keep it brief on what would be the mechanics of fixed term employment as envisaged in these laws. How would it work?
Essentially, it's an alternative mode of employment where employees are covered under the same, exactly the same kind of benefits that a regular employee enjoys or gets. So there is no differentiation from the point of view of social security benefits. When it comes to the wages will be at par. And I think that ample clarity has been provided that there cannot be any differentiation on wages. The flexibility that it provides to employers is that there is a start date and there is a start date and a close date, and hence there is clarity between the employer and the employee in terms of the fact that this has a clear end date and beyond which there may not be a continuity. So essentially, it is a win-win solution for an employer and an employee at this point of time, and it's completely fair and just. So I think the apprehensions that used to exist that when you take people on contract, there is discrimination.
I will have to end it there. I will have to end it there because I'm running out of time. But I want to thank you, Ritu, as well as Pradeep Bhargava, for joining us and explaining in simple terms this very complex new system which has been put into place. We're dealing with a whole set of major reforms in the last few days. As always, the devil is in the details and the test will be in implementation.